just because it's such a huge mountain to climb. No other fighting game has this mountain where you just, you're endlessly climbing. Because it's so complicated, it's so difficult. But at the same time, that's what makes Tekken Tekken and makes it so satisfying to master. I think they're both like really extremely good fighting games. I think they are the two best fighting games. And it's good that they're so different. I think Street Fighter is the king of 2D, and Tekken is like, well, undisputed king of 3D. Every single other 3D fighter is dead and buried. Virtua Fighter stopped being a thing 10 years ago, and Soul Calibur, which is 3D, sold okay, but not enough to warrant a sequel. I think Soul Calibur 6 is going to be the last Soul Calibur for a long time. But I think the key difference, obviously, no surprise, Tekken is a 3D fighting game. Like, you can move laterally in depth. Whereas in Street Fighter, you can't sidestep. What you will do instead is jump. And this adds a lot of fun gameplay to Street Fighter, in my opinion, where it turns into what they refer to as footsies, I believe. Where you can't jump in against a player who has good reactions. He will anti-air you. So we'll just very carefully move back and forth. And interestingly, with Street Fighter is that the guard you want to use in Street Fighter is a crouching guard. That's the norm, rather than a standing guard. In Tekken, it's a standing guard, because mids are so powerful, and everything is an overhead in Tekken. Whereas in Street Fighter, you can guard pretty much 99% of mids by crouching. So there's a complete opposite here. And what makes this interesting in Street Fighter is that then, when you do these footsies moving back and forth, is that you're going to want to crouch guard in between your movement. And when you're crouch guarding, you can't move. Right? So that kind of shuts down your movement. Yeah, I don't know. I just find that I find the footsies in Street Fighter very interesting. That's when the game starts for me, when people really can't easily jump in and try and force mix-ups or cross-ups. But they're just so different. And how in Street Fighter, pretty much everything is safe. Most of your normals are safe, unreactable. The big normals are 12 frames. In Tekken, 12 frame is a very fast attack, like insanely fast. So we're just, the pacing is just so different. And all the movement you do in Street Fighter is a commitment. Like, you can't cancel a forward dash, a back dash, a jump. You always commit to things. Whereas in Tekken, movement is completely fluid. It's immediately cancelable. The only thing that determines restrictions on movement in Tekken is how quickly you move your hand or your fingers. You can just do whatever you want with the movement. It's completely fluid. Which also gives you unbelievably high player expression in terms of execution, you know. One player's movement in Tekken is not another player's movement. And then you can see some people have inhuman movement, just moving so quickly. And I always find that to be a very cool thing about Tekken, that is not really replicated in any other fighting game, because Tekken's movement is completely unique. No other fighting game does that. And it leads to very high player expression in Tekken, execution-wise, because movement is the same with all of the characters. Extremely expressive, extremely fast. Which is why I always love when I hear from 2D players who play Tekken, it's so slow, Tekken, compared to Street Fighter. The attacks are so fast in Street Fighter. I'm like, have you seen how quickly people move around in Tekken? Like, have you seen JDCR play Tekken? It's like, but I guess those people don't really understand what makes Tekken Tekken and what makes Street Fighter Street Fighter. But another way where you have a very high player expression in Tekken compared to Street Fighter is just the amount of characters. There are 50 characters in Tekken, and in Street Fighter there are 18 as of now, and maybe that will turn into like 25 soon or whatever, but Tekken has a lot of characters, and every single character has about 100 attacks. And they also, due to having 100 attacks, we usually have a lot of player expression. You can just take a character like Ken, and you'll see some variety in how people play him. And Zangief, you'll see some variety, but mostly they will operate the same way. The player's approach to them. Whereas when you take a character like Steve in Tekken, you have something that is just unbelievably complicated. It's a little bit like, oh, you want a quick introduction to Zangief? You could probably solve that in a 5-minute basic guide, right? This is how you play him. Or what is anti-Zangief? Well, here's a 5-minute explanation. But if you want to give someone a basic understanding of a character like Steve in Tekken, it's like, I don't know if we'll cover it in an hour, to be honest. Maybe if we're really fast. But in terms of player expression, you can play Steve like Knee does, and just fall back, play defensively, and react to what your opponent is doing and throw back once with really strong timing. Or you can play him enormously aggressively if you want, and rush people down with very strong mix-ups, stance mix-ups. He can play very knowledge-checky, timing-oriented like me, counter hits. Yeah, it's just, I don't know, the sky's the limit most of the time with characters in Tekken. Extensive move lists and huge amounts of characters, it just leads to player expression. And the characters in Tekken are also allowed to break the rules of the game at a higher extent than in Street Fighter, in my opinion, and most fighting games. You have a million different examples of this, but just to explain it quickly, we allowed Akuma to join our game, and we allowed him to bring his own system into Tekken. He has a 2D jump in a game that has no anti-airs. I don't think I need to say anything other than that. It kind of just nails it immediately. And of course, the complexity of Tekken is never ending because the sheer amount of attacks, the amount of properties every attack has. And these are properties that are shared in other fighting games, like what does a normal hit do? What does it do on block? What does it do on whiff? What does it do on counter hit? Is it a low? Is it a mid? Is it a high? But also in Tekken you have to factor in, like, the attack has not a 2D hitbox, it's got a 3-dimensional geometrical shape hitbox. Where it might be homing, it might track to one side, and there's no such thing as a standardized mid in Tekken either, which leads to Dragunov's mids that are very high hitboxes. They almost operate as highs against a lot of characters who have a lot of built-in evasion. So again, you have 5,000 attacks, and you have no such thing as a standardized high, mid, or low. And this just leads to a never-ending set of interactions between attacks. Oh, Heihachi's Demon Uppercut goes under Dragunov's while running too. Oh, but it doesn't go under Paul's down 1+2 shoulder. And that stuff you actually have to test out and witness. All of these interactions. So, Tekken to me, God, this is such a long take on this, but so that's why Tekken to me, again, a lot of people disliked Leffen, his take on the game when he did a review of Tekken, and he said that it's the cheapest fighting game out there, and he does have a point in that in Tekken, in no other game is it more viable to just spam and knowledge check than in Tekken. You just have so much stuff to throw against your opponent. And this is what I liked with Street Fighter, in that it felt very fair, in that the characters have, there's only 18 characters and they have very few attacks. And to me, during a set against someone, it felt quite realistic to actually learn how to deal with that character during the set. Whereas in Tekken, it's like, good luck just learning the lay matchup in a set against the character. And then due to the sheer amount of characters, you end that set and it's like, okay, I learned some stuff, but it can take months before you see a lay again. So it's I do like that with Street Fighter, the sense of fairness. Like, you very rarely get knowledge checked in Street Fighter, and if you do, you can sort of learn how to handle that BS reasonably quickly. And also, I do appreciate with Street Fighter 6 that there's almost no comeback mechanic. You have a drive bar, which adds a lot of interesting gameplay and nuance to the game. But other than the critical art, when you have low HP, which adds a little bit of damage to your level 3, outside of that, there's no comeback mechanic. None. And in Tekken, you'll still have rage arts in Tekken 8 that do half life and are minus 13 on block. I gotta say, Street Fighter moving away from appeasing to beginners with comeback mechanics, like, oh, you get rewarded for getting your ass kicked. I love that Street Fighter 6 went away from that. They went in the opposite direction. I really respect that. Probably one of my favorite things about Street Fighter 6, to be honest. So yeah, to me, there's a sense of fairness in Street Fighter where it's not very knowledge checky. You quite quickly get into how does my character work, how does the opponent's character work. There's no tricky movement to learn. You get it immediately. Oh, I can jump over a projectile, I can dash forward, I can dash backwards, I can jump. What's an anti-air? You get into the mind game so quickly when you play Street Fighter. Whereas with Tekken being new to that game, how do I move? You need a PhD in execution. And if you just hold forward or backwards, you cover no distance. And I mean, trying to explain someone what sidestepping does, it's like, and when we get on Alyssa just doing this in their face with 100 attacks, you know, it's like, it's so difficult on beginners, Tekken, in comparison to Street Fighter. So, but in the end, you know, what gives Tekken its personality and charm is the fact that we have 50 characters with 100 attacks. And that's what makes it so satisfying when you become a really good Tekken player. When you've mastered that fluid movement and you've mastered the matchups. It's just a tremendous sense of accomplishment, at least for me, just because it's such a huge mountain to climb. No other fighting game has this mountain where you just, you're endlessly climbing because it's so complicated, it's so difficult. But at the same time, that's what makes Tekken Tekken and makes it so satisfying to master. So, yes, that would be my short summary of Tekken versus Street Fighter. Both incredible games, absolutely incredible games.